Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Pune International Center, India Development Foundation, University of Department of Economics, Mumbai University, and Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. On behalf of all these four institutes, I welcome everyone for uh, day two of Pathways to Urban Future conference. So we will begin with the first session. Uh, So today's first session is Transforming Urban Governance, which will be chaired by this Mr. Gautam Chatterjee. Paper will be presented by this Dr. Jha sir, and discussant will be Kunal Kumar. He will join online, and second discussant Professor Abhay Pete is here. So let me begin this session by introducing the dignitaries. First, I would like to introduce the today's session chair, Gautam Chatterjee sir. Gautam Chatterjee is a retired officer of the Indian Administration Services of Maharashtra Cadet, a gold medalist in MSc Mathematics from Patna University. Chatterjee sir also holds a postgraduate diploma in urban planning and housing from Institute of Housing Studies, Rotterdam, Netherlands. So, his illustrious career spanning over 33 years, Sir has held the several important assignments in both Government of Maharashtra and Government of India. Notable among this being a collector of Ratnagiri, additional municipal commissioner of Mumbai Municipal Corporation, joint director of General of Foreign Trade in the Ministry of Commerce, CEO of Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority, CEO of a Slum Rehabilitation Authority, OSD of a Dharavi Redevelopment Project, Principal Secretary of Maharashtra Housing Department, Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Defense. So after his superannuation, he was served as an officer on special duty to the Chief Minister of the Maharashtra before taking over as a chairperson of the Maharashtra Real Estate Regulatory Authority. Welcome, sir. So today's session paper presenter, Dr. Jha sir, is a distinguished fellow at Observer Research Foundation, Mumbai. He works on urbanization, urban sustainability, urban governance, and urban planning. Dr. Jha belongs to the 1977 batch of Indian Administration Services. During his time at the IS, through 1980 and 90s, he was administrator, Pandharpur Municipal Council, administrator and municipal commissioner, Solapur, collector and deputy collector, municipal administration, Ahmednagar. He was the Metropolitan Commissioner of MMRDA. His subsequent postings were Regional Advisor to South Asia in the Urban Management Program of the UNDP and UN Habitat, Vice Chairman and Managing Director of MSRDC, and Principal Secretary Transport Post, Ports and State Excise, Government of Maharashtra. Dr. Jha has co-authored the books Towards the People, Friendly Cities, published UNICEF, Urbanizes, published by Yashada, and co-edited Perspective of Urban Development, published by the Capital Publishing Company. Welcome, sir. Uh, the today's session's discussion, Mr. Kumal Kumar is the IS holds office of Joint Secretary and Mission Director, Smart Cities, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India since May 2018. Initially, he was a municipal commissioner at Pune Municipal Corporation, Maharashtra for 4 years. I welcome him also. Uh, Another station chair, Dr. Professor Pete, is the chairman of Academic Council NISM. He is a special advisor to Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. He was a senior resident fellow at Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy. Uh, he served as an advisor consultant to the Village Social Transformation Foundation of Impact Assessment CMRDF in Maharashtra, uh, and as a consultant to UNICEF of Maharashtra. He is a member of TAC of for MPI with the Urban Maharashtra UNICEF Planning and Housing Startup Index. He has been consultant to the many private government and multilateral agencies such as CRISIL, then Planning Commission, World Bank, UNDP, UNHS, World Bank institutes. He has served on several high-level expert committees of government of central, state, local levels. Professor Pete has authored two books in the area of economics and also published several research papers and articles in reputed journals. Welcome, sir. Now, without further ado, I hand over to the chairperson of today's session, Chatterjee, sir. Over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Jha, Professor Pete, Kunal, I believe, is joining us online, and all esteemed participants of this national conference on pathways to urban future. Before I request Dr. Jha to make his base paper presentation on the first topic of discussion today, which is on urban governance, transforming urban governance. Let me just give a brief background on what we are expecting out of this session. Beginning of the century, two important things happened. One, of course, was in the Mayor's Conference, Webington Webb announced that this will be a century of the cities, and also said that by the middle of the century, 2/3 of the population will be staying in the cities, and thus turning out to be true. Soon thereafter, in 2001, the government of India also did a conference on good urban governance, and that good urban governance campaign agreed, I think unanimously, that there are 6 key intricately linked issues on which the whole urban governance debate and actions will have to take place. They were urban decentralization, transparency and civic engagement, municipal management and capacity building, all the 3 subjects which I believe should be in our first session on transforming urban governance. And the other 3 were municipal finance, which is our next session, integration of the poor and the marginalized, which is also there, one of the sessions. Amita is heading that. And of course, urban environment, where we're talking about the various problems arising out of climate change. Now, as we see the urbanization, we find that the cities will have to cope with much greater numbers, with complex demographic profile, and very high densities. We also see that city agencies will have to provide services keeping equity in mind, because most of the cities we have a whole lot of people who are less endowed people and who are kept out of the various processes, including planning and of course delivery of services. We'll also find that the cities will have to find resources to meet both the need for maintaining the infrastructure and also augmenting infrastructure, both physical and social, where we find today that the urban local bodies have neither a mandated functional domain nor matching finances to carry out those. Cities will have to respond to the urbanization of poverty. Cities will have to preserve their environment, and overall, cities will have to become livable, safe, resilient, and of course sustainable. We are also aware of the 4 factors, the interplay of 4 factors which are responsible for urbanization: the natural multiplication of existing population, new towns, expansion of the cities, and of course migration. But then given that, we have a situation where the 74th Constitutional Amendment, we see nothing happening on that front. Autonomy of the ULB is truncated and they have nearly become state agents. We have city information systems, huge amount of information asymmetry, and the information systems are inadequate. Planning methodologies obsolete, planners forget. The existence also of informal sector in the cities. Affordable housing is not to be seen. ULBs are functionally limited, and financial base remains fragile. And with all that, we have the functionaries who are supposed to actually carry out these functions with the finances, which is inadequate. Functionaries being hit by severe capacity constraint. Now, when we are discussing the transforming urban governance, we'll have to look at what are the 3 P's of governance, which are basically the 3 P's of decision making. One is the principle. Second is the process, how, in what process we are making the decisions, and of course the product, which is the final delivery of services. And when we talk about decisions, decisions have to be transparent, and the decision makers have to be accountable. Now, every stakeholder, we saw this in the case study pointed out yesterday by Patricia of Ghent in Belgium, where all stakeholders, which is state, the parastatals, the private sector, the civil society, and the citizens at large, they should actually play a role in the decision-making process. And of course, there will be differing views, differing perspectives, priorities, opinions. There has to be someone who should reconcile them so that at least we don't end up in gridlock. We'll have those decisions taken in time and then move forward. So with this in mind, I think I'll now request Dr. Jha to make his paper presentation. And as I said, we expect that in this session, we should come up with some guidelines as to what should be our policy, taking it forward, what should be the statutory base in which we have to actually perform, and of course, a clarity on what should be the role of the state, how we should empower citizens, what should be the delivery mechanism, should there be partnerships brought in the delivery mechanism, or should there be a monopoly of the functionaries of ULB doing that? How should we bring in information communication technology so as to have more transparency in all the services? And of course, capacity building, and not to forget, planning, which should be inclusive in nature. So with that, I hand over to Dr. Jha to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Kelkar and PIC for having given us the opportunity to present take up a very important subject, that's transforming urban governance, something we've been talking for quite long, but not much seems to be happening on ground. We need to revisit the entire issue. I have a small presentation. Material on urban governance is a feat. We have a shortage of time. I therefore shall be summary, and in the allotted time I'll try and cover as much ground as possible. I will take you, can you operate it from there? When you say operate, that means like this one. Okay. Chairman in his opening remarks covered this slide, and this is part of the paper that has been circulated, that after the 74th constitutional amendment, which was done sometime in the 1990s, there was a follow-up through a good governance campaign in Delhi, where this was a national stakeholder consultation which was taken up. And at the end of the conference, Government of India released its paper and stated 6 issues that were central to transforming urban governance. And the listed ones were urban decentralization, municipal finance, urban environment, integration of the poor and marginalized, transparency and civic engagement, and municipal management and capacity building. Since I was part of this discussion that was happening, because the partner agency was UN Habitat, I could tell you that this was through a proper consultative process, and more or less there was unanimous agreement that these were the issues that need to be earnestly taken up for future deliberation and action. In the background of these 2 events that happened, let us see where we stand in 2022 in regard to challenges before urban local bodies. As far as urban local bodies and their autonomy is concerned, it's quite truncated. Decentralization is largely absent, and there is overwhelming state control on urban local bodies in whichever field you take, in the placement of senior officials, in approving development plans, in the kind of functions and finances that they would have. The state continues to be in the driver's seat, and the ULBs are generally required to follow what the state orders. At the local level, there is growing disenchantment among the citizens with the quality of local governance that's being delivered by local leadership. leadership itself is weak and fractured. As we know, we have presidents in the councils where they are the effective chief executive officer. But in the larger cities, the municipal commissioner is the chief executive, and the mayor plays an extremely peripheral role. Uh, Transparency and accountability has grown a bit because of things like the RTI Act and the pressures of technology, which have made municipal bodies uh, be more transparent and accountable than what they were earlier. But it is still peripheral, and a full-scale transparency and accountability exercise has not been undertaken by any municipal body. Uh, Employment in municipal corporations is not the first preference of either technical or other kinds of staff. They prefer to go into other jobs. So the intake itself is poor, and then over a period of time, with very little capacity building, the municipal capacities become at a very low level, as a consequence of which you would find that in many cities, most of the original work that has to be done by municipalities are now being outsourced and done by consultants. So many cities have become consultant driven. Urban planning is outdated, but even before that, most cities don't have a plan. Most cities don't do a development plan. They are not capable of doing one. So they have to again outsource this work. It goes through a long process. One could count and add more than what the chairman in his opening remarks already said. So urban planning is not answering the questions that are there on ground and the questions that are going to emerge. So urban planning itself needs to be reformed in a major way. These are one sets of challenges, but there are more challenges that are coming before them. They don't have mandated functional or financial domain. The infrastructure provision is poor. They can't keep pace with the requirement of infrastructure, especially in some cities that are growing fast. And once infrastructure is built, maintaining them is even poorer. And all kinds of instances that we find right up to Morbi clearly indicate that there are more infrastructure failures that are going to happen in cities in the coming days. Poor and weak are marginalized because we have not thought through this problem. We concentrated on rural poverty while the country started changing its rural poverty profile into urban poverty. And the nature of the poverty in urban areas, of course, changed, and a lot of that was to deal with spatial non-integration of the poor in the cities. What is also noticeable is that as cities grow, the poor become more and more marginalized. So the larger cities are more anti-poor than the smaller ones. Failing environment, threatening quality of life, and especially in the winter we get figures from various cities showing the kind of pollution levels that exist in cities. Not much seems to be happening on this front. And to add to all this, we have now climate change emerging as a serious issue, and we have had series of cities with facing floods, facing heat waves, leading to preparation of action plans on how to tackle heat, on how to tackle flood. This was, in fact, in the disaster program of India. Urban floods were not even mentioned till late, when it came to be mentioned for the first time when in Mumbai 2005 a major flood happened, and the country realized that urban floods are also here to stay. So what all these factors indicate is that we need to look deeper, and the kind of institutional construct that we have, they cannot nurse back cities to health. Something major has to happen, and that's why the title of this conference is Transforming Urban Governance. So nothing less than that will do. Tinkling does not help us. Incremental changes, for that the time has gone because we didn't do any, and therefore It's in the nature of change that it becomes radical, more and more radical, as we postpone changes. So what do we do in this scenario, and how do we transform urban governance is the question that lies before us. Now, I am now referring to recommendations of a committee that Government of Maharashtra had formed, and it was called the Committee on Transparency, Efficiency and Accountability in Urban Local Bodies, and it made a series of recommendations. I was part of that committee along with Gautam, who is our chairman right now, and we had inputs coming from Mr. Pathak, Dr. Pethe, and several others. And a report was submitted in, I think, 2019 to the government on this. One of the first recommendations was that if we are going to be an urbanized country, the country needs to have a national urbanization policy. Some time back, the country did put out a draft, but it's become second nature that drafts are put, but they are never finalized. I remember from my early days when I was with UN Habitat, a draft slum policy was prepared. I don't think it ever took a final shape. So we need to have a national urbanization policy which details how urbanization would be guided in the country. How would it be decentralized? What are the kinds of urbanizations that will happen in states? What would be the peri-urbanization policy? What would we do about affordable housing, about urban planning? So it should set a template which the states can then follow and put into their state urbanization policy. So the policy area itself has been lacking because we have no clear guidelines on how we need to proceed with urbanization. It's quite clear that in such a large country, very few urban local bodies cannot take the entire load of the kind of migration that is happening. Because if the cities are going to grow in their economies, people are going to come in. There will be larger and larger migration. It is already being warned that because of climate change, whenever rural distress happens, that will create waves of migration into cities. So for that kind of urbanization, we have to have a decentralized kind of urbanization. It's not something which this committee pointed out for the first time. This was already pointed out by a committee of Charles Correa in the 1980s. Of which Mr. Pathak was a member, and they had pointed out to some 300 odd growth centers on which India needs to concentrate. I don't think much happened on that front. So that's an area where we need to work. Urban poverty policy has to be very clearly enunciated because we are in for a lot of people coming into our cities who could be called poor in the sense that they will not. Urban poverty's features mainly are that it is not in terms of ability to earn and to have enough food. It is in terms of having housing, having employment opportunities, and these being built into the city framework so that they get this whenever they come in. Health and education. So urban poverty is an area that is going to emerge to become even larger, and we need to deeply think through as to how we are going to integrate poverty into the urban framework. Urban planning has to be obviously revamped. The whole template was set right at the beginning of our independence, and a lot of things have changed since then. One of the factors that we need to bear in mind as far as urbanization is concerned is that urbanization is dynamic, and every decade the problems that arise keep changing, and therefore you cannot set a template for all time. You need to keep on revisiting them. So urban planning obviously has to be revamped, and decentralization has to happen in a big way. It has to be from the state to the city, from city to wards, and from wards to what this committee proposed was Jan Sabhas. Now, if you are going to operate British kind of a statute, obviously you're not going to find citizens anywhere close to the decision-making process. That's what we have carried through till now, and therefore, if we are going to have any substantive transformation, the statutory foundations also to have to be completely replaced. Then we come to the question of bridging governance deficit. Now, fixing the question of leadership is extremely important. And what the committee recommends is that we have to have a team model, which is essentially directly elected executive mayor. So the powers have to be going to the chief executive, who is a popularly elected person. Now, the arguments that are given against this are that when you have a center and a state system in a parliamentary democracy system, where the prime minister or the chief minister work through the cabinet, why should the mayor be a directly elected mayor who exercises all the powers? Why do we presidentialize the urban local bodies in terms of leadership? It would lead to concentration of power. There would be no diversity of opinion. The role of councillors would be compromised. And there is a possibility of gridlock. That is, if the mayor is a directly elected mayor through across the city, and if there is a body which is of the opposite political dispensation, then there is a possibility that the mayor cannot go along with the body. And this has happened in some of the states where presidents were directly elected by the city. So how do we deal with that? Arguments for DEEM are that cities are in a position almost of a war. Therefore, they need to take quick decisions. Speed and efficiency is the essence. Quality of leadership improves if you are going to have a directly elected mayor. There will be greater visibility of the mayor, as is across the Western world. He will have greater legitimacy because he would be elected by the entire voting population of that city. And he would then be accountable. He cannot point fingers as happens today, where if the chief executive, that is the municipal commissioner, goes wrong, he points fingers to the standing committee points fingers to other committees, and so on and so forth. And no accountability is ever possible to be settled today. So the recommended model is that we need to have a mayor who is in a position to take decisions, who can choose his own advisors. So there is no place for any standing council or other councils. Those can be created according to the requirements of the mayor, and he will take all decisions and stand by them and will be accountable for them. Because in the kind of problems that the cities face, we cannot have a system where any decision takes at least 3 to 6 months to fructify. That's the average time that major decisions in cities today take. On the statutory side, the recommendations are that there should be a single operational act for all ULBs. We don't, since they perform the same kind of functions, have the same kinds of powers, they should make do with a single act. You have to have the council, the mayor, the wards committee, the councillors, and the Jan Sabha. So one of the suggestions that have been given here is that the people have to be involved in decision-making process in a democracy. It is there in the 73rd Amendment where the Gram Sabha participates in decision-making, where all voting members of the village are members. A similar kind of a situation is possible, but we don't need a mere Jan Sabha that is an advisory body, as has been recommended in the past. For instance, the model Nagar Raj bill which Government of India presented some time back was where the citizens would have a role, but their role would be advisory. The recommendation here is that the Jan Sabha will not be responsible for the revenue side of the budget, but whatever monies are allocated to a particular ward, what works would be taken would be decided by the Jan Sabha, and there will be a social audit, the Jan Sabha audit of whatever expenditures happen. It will of course be headed by the corporator of that particular ward. You have to have a functional and financial domain, and it has to be spelled out in the statute itself. It cannot be left to the whims and fancies of the state governments. You have to have a municipal services cadre, because if you are going to be, many of the states are going to be major urban states. They are on the cusp of becoming more urbanized than being rural. So you need a municipal services cadre which is specialized in terms of handling municipal problems. When you have a mayor who is going to be all powerful, then you need a municipal vigilance authority, an ombudsman kind of a body who keeps check on what the mayor does. You have to have an audits and accounts committee which externally audits the expenditures of municipal bodies, and you have to have a municipal regulatory authority which looks into the kind of taxes and rates that get fixed by the municipal body. Today we find that municipal bodies are extremely loath even to raise property taxes. In the discussions that we were having in the committee, one of the municipal councils reported to us that a resolution was passed that in the next 20 years property tax will not be raised. So if that is the kind of a situation, obviously what's happened at the state and the central level with regulatory authorities coming in is bound to happen at the municipal level, and we have recommended a municipal regulatory authority to come in and look at the niceties of fixing rates in municipal bodies. How do you build transparency? I think there are many cities which will give you examples of the spate of transparency mechanisms that they have included already. And some of the ones that I picked for elaboration here are deliberative, so all town hall meetings to be streamed. Administrative information on mayor, high functionaries should be on the web. The budget, the major procurements, the major expenditures should be made public through the net. Even citizens should be answerable, so property tax, defaulters, etc. you could put on the net. All kinds of grants and assets and plans and environment, parking, except very inanimate things that need not go on the web. Everything else needs to be transparent in the municipal bodies, because there is nothing secretive about what the municipal corporation does. So there is a huge scope of transparency. Information technology makes it very easy, and this should be one of the roles of the state government, to set a template which can be followed by all municipal bodies. Accountability. So ULB is accountable to the state. Mayor and wards committees are accountable to the council and to the vigilance authority. Councillors should be accountable for attendance, for disclosure in terms of what they do, what are the financial interests. If they are drawing any pecuniary benefit from ULB in contracts, etc., that should be put on the net, and all their properties need to be displayed. Jan Sabha has to be accountable to the council, and officials are accountable to the council and the mayor. And for all these accountability mechanisms, you have these MVA external audit and Jan audit that could be done. So it is possible for the municipal bodies to be fully accountable. And if you are going to have a body where the mayor exercises powers, then accountability and transparency mechanisms have to come in, because if they are absent, then all kinds of misdemeanors could happen in the municipal body. So it's not a part game here. Either you take the whole or or you don't do any changes. One of the main things, of course, that need to be pointed out is that in the current scheme of things, having a directly elected mayor makes no sense, because he cannot exercise powers if the municipal bodies themselves have no powers. So unless you have a powerful municipal body, you can't have a powerful mayor. So the entire system therefore needs to change. Capacity building, it's a very neglected area. There are huge gaps in ULB capacity. Capacity building institutions and training manuals are not there. A state as urbanized as Maharashtra has one training center called Yashoda, which mainly does rural training. Their urban training, I hear, has become further truncated. You have to have decentralized capacity building in the sense that you don't need to gather people in institutions. You could have them at the divisional level, at the city level, so that reduces expenditure and makes you do many more capacity building exercises than if you centralize them. What is also important is that if the entire city is going to participate in municipal functioning, then you cannot have capacity building of officials only. You need to have capacity building of elected representatives, of women councillors, of officials. Women councillors especially need to be prepared for the kind of gender balance that needs to be included in the city. Today we find that women councillors are there, but they hardly argue for the case of gender balance, gender requirements in cities. And one of the reasons is that they have not really been given the kind of capacity inputs that are required for that purpose. You have to have capacity building of citizens. If IAS officers are going to work within the municipal bodies, and more of them are already working, they do not come with trained background in terms of municipal handling. They spend their initial years in rural areas, in rural management, and suddenly they are thrown into municipal bodies, and it's a question of learning as you do your job. I think that kind of a situation will have to change, and you will have to give more and more input, especially in urbanized states, for the IAS officers. I will not go into details of the financial efficiency and self-reliance, because this is already happening in a separate session. But I need to point out two major changes that have happened, which have further made the municipal finance extremely fragile. One is the GST, which has more or less subsumed everything except property taxes. And the other is the Land Acquisition Act, because the Land Acquisition Act says that any land to be acquired in cities would be 4 times the ready reckoner rate, which means that no municipal corporation is in a position to acquire any land for growing amenity needs that come in the cities. When I was doing the development plan of Mumbai, which Mr. Pathak had already given those figures, I borrowed it from him. The total amenity cost of the municipal corporation was 14 lakh crores, which would be a revenue which municipal corporations would not be able to spare even in 100 years. So if that is the kind of cost that has gone into building amenities, you can imagine what would happen in other cities. Central and state assistance has to be there. I think we need, but the most important point that I need to bring out here is the recommendation which Dr. Kelkar made in the 13th Finance Commission, that 6% of GST must be given to local bodies. Now, unless we act on that, because that will be substantial revenue, if that is not done, property tax is not going to keep the cities buoyant. Cities are going to financially sink. There will be more infrastructure failures. So finance is one of the things that seriously needs looking into, which is not happening currently. I want to bring in one other factor here and just spend a minute on that. You know, in the 1980s, when we were working in municipal bodies, private sector participation was being recommended all over. And we are not against private sector participation, but the experience in the last 30 years globally has not been very good with private sector participation. If you read the latest World Cities report of UN Habitat, you will find that now in the West there is a wave of remunicipalization where contracts given out to private parties are being cancelled. And one of the main reasons why this is being done is that I'm closing in a minute. 2 minutes. Oh, thank you. That's sufficient. So, France, in fact, was the first in 2010 which had given out its water supply services to a private body. That has been cancelled, and now France has taken over. The French municipal bodies have taken over water supply and are doing it again. The main argument that was being given in favor of PPPs was that they bring in more transparency, efficiency, and deliver better services. The experience has been that yes, there has been improvement, but the equity factor has entirely been missed, and that has had a lot of backlash in many cities. So if we have to devise PPPs, we have to see how we build in equity, either through viability funding or some other mechanism where services are also reached to the poorest classes that live in cities. It's a major thing that is working against PPPs. So at the moment, we have a huge unfunded mandate of the cities, and financial efficiency and self-reliance is a far cry. Concluding, I would say that in the last 30 years, we have been moving in, put it harshly, in reverse gear as far as transforming urban governance is concerned. Even politically, you would find that things that have been stated in the constitution, that elections must be held every 5 years, has somehow been put aside, and you have in many municipal bodies now elections that have not been held, and administrators have been ruling the roost for the last year or so, which essentially means that those cities have been taken over by the state. So decentralization has not happened. Financially, municipal bodies have become weaker. Problems are mounting. Migration is mounting. So we are in a difficult situation. Difficult situations cannot be tackled when you have cold feet in regard to transformation measures. I think a lot of courage is required to do wholesale transformation. Let's hope the country is able to find that courage and take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jha, for taking us through the excellent presentations that were made in the points that were made in the committee's report. We are told that Mr. Kunal Kumar is still in a meeting, so I would request Professor Pete to give his views on this subject. And in the meantime, if Kunal Kumar comes out of the meeting, then we'll ask him to also join.
Yeah, I have joined. I have joined.
Okay. Then why don't you go ahead?
No, I was very keenly listening to sir's presentation. Thank you. Should I go ahead? Can you guys hear me? Hello?
You are audible, Kunal.
Right. I will go ahead. Thank you so much. First of all, after a lot of time, I think the presentation that sir has made just now comes as a breath of fresh air, because most of the time when we are in conference rooms and discussing urban issues, it's almost a stereotype discussion, and you can almost, before you enter the conference, know what is going to be spoken about. But this came as a breath of fresh air because there is some new analysis and new ideas that have been put on the table. I am not as experienced as Sir is, but I've spent a lot of time so far, about 8.5 years in municipalities and then as district collector, and now about 5 years in the government of India, driving crucial urban intervention. I'll speak from my experience and also from my interactions that I've had also at the city level, state level, and now quite extensively at the national level. I think it was very mildly put by Sir that, and if any time I become less audible because I am worried about the range here, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep speaking. Uh, so he very mildly put it that we are sort of in a reverse gear. I sometimes feel that we are almost in a trap, and trap is such that most of the times in the trap, what we want, what we do, and probably we do it with right intentions, we further get into trap. And so therefore it is a trap because everything that we do actually ensures that we remain in the trap, we get deeper into it. And why is that happening? I somehow, I'll just try to relate with a story that it comes from my personal experience in Pune. So we were trying to convince the city and its councillors and its elected executive about the need for having good quality 24 by 7 water supply in Pune. You can drink from tap 24 hours anytime in the day in any house of Pune. That we thought was one of the basic things that a city like Pune should tackle now that we are in the 21st century. Now, having said that, of course, the technical aspects of it, of getting a DPR, and, that is a mess in itself. But let's assume that you can solve that battle. But when I used to go to community meetings, and so I used to go to meetings where RWAs would host, 300 citizens, and they would come and listen. I used to go to meetings of civil society organizations, sometimes civil society come political organizations, because I had to build a consensus among stakeholders. So when we used to speak about why 24 by 7 is important and how the city is planning to go ahead, I remember that 6 or 8, if not more, times out of 10, people would say, no, we are happy with 2 hours of water, don't give us 24 hours of water. And that used to come as a shock to me because that is intuitively what you don't think that citizens will ask you for. They will be very vociferous for the best quality of thing that they can aspire for. Now, when I reflect back on this, I realize that this is probably the deepest issue that all of us in urban have to solve as to why is a need which is obviously being felt, because why did we even want to drive 24 by 7 water supply in Pune? It is because uh, there were a lot of complaints about water supply, not good quality water coming, people getting water once in 2 days, sometimes water coming irregularly, a lot of complaints about leakage, etc., etc. So it was a rampant issue for complaints, which is why we thought this is good. So obviously was a felt need to improve water supply, and but it wasn't transforming into a demand. Uh, how much time do I have after this? I'll just pitch accordingly.
Another 5 minutes maybe, Kunal? That is okay?
Okay. So then, when I went back to the drawing board and thought about it, I think, fundamentally how it happens even to people like us, maybe organizations, when we have a felt need, uh, there is a lot of process that goes into converting that into a demand. This is not a city where, everyone will come together, unite on a platform and say, this is what we need. Most of the time, citizen needs are expressed in negatives. Like, I don't get water. I don't know what you want to do about it. Please do something about it. I don't have good roads. There's no street light which functions. Make it work. But I don't know how you'll make it work. So negatives are reflected by citizens. And it is group of visionaries, a group of people who understand that domain, who take the risk of initiating a solution. Now, I think that then becomes the fulcrum of action, and either the solution scales or it then morphs and adapts through a messy process of negotiation that happens between various stakeholders in a city environment, which is hotbed of democracy. Then, solutions are discovered. Now, this process of version of need to demand, this classical process of negotiation, and that doesn't happen in our cities because I think there is this lack of this ability to become a repository of the vision of the city, or the lack of ability to host the needs and aspirations of the city in the of the citizens in the city itself, whether you call it through a mayor, whoever. There is no there is no host for the vision. There is no host for the demand, and therefore there's no host for the vision and the risk taking and the appetite take something forward. And you can debate about whether municipal commissioners can come in, this one can come in. Technical solutions will work if we have the right answer of hosting the needs and aspirations into the form of a vision for the city and then driving it through a process of messy negotiation. Probably demand will come forth. That is when a lot of things will start to happen in our cities. And there are multiple examples through which I have come to the same conclusion. Like, for example, why people in slums don't demand better education, why people in in low income communities don't demand better quality of health in our government hospitals. Right. Now, what Sir was saying is, I term it very crudely as the FAT analogy, FAT. FAT analogy is like Sir said about autonomy being important. Yes, autonomy is important. If I was not autonomous, I wouldn't have reached where I am today. It is a process of multiple autonomous decisions in my life that I have taken to be able to reach where I am, and I could have done something else because I'm autonomous. Now, city lacks autonomy, which I'm in the FAT analogy. Instead of saying autonomy, I'm saying freedom. The city has to have the freedom to dream. From the dream, the action will emerge. Then accountability and transparency, which is FAT. Accountability and transparency is very important and very interlinked to each other. I think the fundamental issue about accountability being to whom has also got to be answered. If I am accountable to the state government because I'm a municipal commissioner and somebody sitting in the state government writes my CR, the confidential report, then that is a mistaken accountability. If I am accountable to the mayor who is not directly accountable to the people, it's also a mistaken accountability. Accountability has to be the constituent who is the most important stakeholder in this entire business. This is the city. And therefore, accountability structures cannot be loosely defined. Otherwise, the Goodhart's law, where if you are accountable to wrong things, people will find ways to meet the measure but not meet the outcome. And transparency, of course, is a very important way of getting accountability in picture. So what Sir is talking about is municipal regulatory authority, etc., etc. Essentially, when you give freedom at the local level, you may stop me when my time is over. So when you get freedom at the local level, you would need risk mitigation at the level of the state. See that the freedom is utilized properly. Risk mitigation has to be done in a very subtle way, in the sense you don't hamper quality autonomous action, even if it is leading to failure. If the process is right, you have to bank upon processes. Even if you are a Warren Buffett or a Charlie Munger, you put your processes in place to invest in stocks. Even then, 2007 financial recession will wipe out your holdings. Doesn't matter. You believe in your process. We have to aspire to build processes in municipal corporations. The state's risk mitigation strategy has to enforce that in a very mature way. And then, of course, you have to set up all the regulatory authorities, etc., as part of it. On capacity, I think I differ from what Sir is saying. In fact, I strongly differ on the municipal cadre business. I think it is completely it's an antithesis of saying that cities should have autonomy, and I believe that yes, there is a case for small cities. Think of it that in the intermediate, let the state support them with human resource. But I would say if autonomy is to be given, full-fledged autonomy of hiring the best from the market should be given to all cities sooner than later. You could have a tapered approach, you could have some other approach, but I don't think a municipal corridor is a good way to look at this at all. None of the great cities in the world look at it like that. And on capacity, I think again this argument on capacity building as such, there is no fundamental capacity building as such. There is nothing called capacity. If I look at a task like providing education, it has four different parts. Education one is the simple business of constructing schools, which our engineers have got used to. Then there is this business of teaching, which again can be build capacity upon activity-based learning. Kar lo, this kar lo, wo kar lo. You can learn about it. But how do you get to good curriculum making? How do you actually make a teacher teach? If I ask a question whether government schools have bad quality of teaching, if they have, is it because of teachers not knowing to teach, or is it because something else? It is obviously because of something else. If I keep giving the teacher capacity to teach better, it won't solve the purpose, because there's certain other things in the water, in the other ingredients and systemic problems that don't let the teacher teach, which is where I think capacity in government is more a structural issue. It's more an incentive issue. It's more an issue of how government functions on the large systemic level than being an issue of the individual and capacity of an organization. So I think there are three levels of capacity which need to be marked out. One is the individual capacity of the constituent himself who is teaching, then capacity of the organization, maybe the school board or whoever school organization at the level of the school, and then the ecological capacity. These are capacity of setting the table in a way that the organizations and the individuals can function better. I think that is completely lost on the state, and the state has to look at building that ecological capacity. And lastly, I think where do we make a headway? Now, I think there is no clear solution here, and I think solutions are not the place to start from. I think we have to keep all our solutions aside and all our great expertise aside and go to the drawing board and ask the state, what is it that you want to aspire for? Somehow there has to be a very open-ended dialogue between states, cities, central governments, other stakeholders. What is it that we aspire for in a state? How do we build that vision in the state? Is it that we look only at logistical solutions of providing water, transport, etc., or are we looking for economically vibrant cities, culturally beautiful cities, people attracted to those cities, happy living and all that? How do you actually get to that? What is your plan? And what is the mix of things that you want to do to achieve that plan? Once you have a plan, once you've sort of manufactured or engineered a vision, then you look at a plan. If you don't have a vision, then there's no plan. What is municipal finance required for if there is no vision at all? So finance is only an instrument of meeting a vision. So we have to build that process of negotiation between these constituents, build a vision, look at the bouquet of things that need to be done, which we end up crudely calling the capital investment plan, etc., etc. But that is only a subset of the entire plan that needs to, because there's policy, there's technology, there is governance, so many other things that need to be fixed for that to happen. And then look at finance, etc., to make that happen. So I think it has to be a process which has to be anchored by some people. I don't know how that's going to happen. I, sitting in the national government, feel that is strongly our role also, but we've not been able to do that so far, of anchoring this process of evolution in an open-ended way, where we do believe that it's driving visions that is important and not driving logistics. So I'll stop here, and extremely happy to see the presentation and being part of deliberations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kunal. Thanks for sharing your experiences, especially your experiences as Municipal Commissioner of Pune, and also your views on accountability, participation, and how do we empower citizens, your views on autonomy, capacity building, solutions to the problems coming from a vision, a goal, and aspiration. So with that, I think we move on to our next presentation from Professor Pete. Professor Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nothing to disagree with what Rabindranath Jha talked about. We are all part of that. Casual empiricism anyway will tell you that transformation of urban governance is absolutely essential. Again, no debate there. Now let me make a few points here in 5 minutes. So Mr. Jha talked about we, uh, you know, Dr. Jha talked about governance in his paper and what he means, and the chairman talked about 3Ps and so on. So let me put in my bit and say what I think governance is, as which we need to transform, and a useful analytical way of looking at it. I think governance conveniently can be looked at in 4 components. Number 1, policy framework, not policies but policy framework in total, informed by basic economic principles. Second, the processes and protocols. The third, capacity building. And fourth, the independent evaluation office or monitoring authority. These 4 buckets would be able to, if we put in, the rationale for that is an underlying mantra, which is that if you have a problem with outcomes, you can go back to one of these buckets and see where the lack is and try to rectify and remedy it. That's the simple mantra. Now, I'm not going to talk about financial empowerment, not just because everyone here knows it. I have talked about it a great deal, and so has all of us. Maybe I'll have an occasion to talk in the finance session. But the fact of the matter is that we don't have empowerment, financial empowerment. Today, in the little time that I have, I want to focus on the non-financial aspects that are very important, and just one component of the 4, in contrast to what Mr. Kunal Kumar talked about, that he doesn't think capacity is very important. But of course, after that, what he went on to say, actually I will underline, we will see what I want to say, which I think is capacity build, which we need. Because when I began working with the government people in various levels, as an academic, I was prone to believing in conspiracy theories, that people really don't want to do things and therefore things are not getting done, not getting implemented and all that. More and more as I work with the government agencies and agents, I realize that it is not the voluntary thing on their part or part of their volition. They simply lack capacity. They lack capacity to understand, appreciate and implement stuff which itself may not be formulated properly. That is the complexity. But let's begin by saying that we have good policy formulation and policy frameworks. And when I'm talking of capacity, I'm talking of having at the fingertips a data warehouse which is user-friendly in all its aspects. Capacity of elected representatives. This is very, very important, because for them to take up that particular and invest in that domain and believe that their political future depends on that particular city's well-being is very important. Does not happen currently, because I think what used to happen earlier has happened here. That is, people will get into, say, television to become Bollywood stars. Things have changed that because of OTTs, and something like that has to, disruption like that has to happen. So that, and one of the ways is, of course, in terms of bureaucracy, the cadres that Mr. Jha talked about. But the idea is not whether, and this has been discussed ad nauseum really, whether we should have cadres and the difficulties of that, etc., etc. The fact of the matter is, if you have top bureaucrats who are nominated by the Chief Minister as the Municipal Commissioner of Mumbai, he is not going to fight for Mumbai against the state. Because naturally, as a professional career bureaucrat, he wants to become CS and go to Delhi and become somebody there, etc. It's just not going to happen. So, in that sense, you need to think of how we will have independent bureaucrats who would want, and maybe China's experience in Shanghai might be of use there, but that's very important. The ownership that I think yesterday Patricia talked about, is very important. How that gets transformed and heard by powers that be. Who owns this city of Mumbai or Delhi or my city, and I will stand for it, etc. That I think, and that elected representatives, the capacity to argue and understand policies in a meaningful way, rather than what they do today, which all of us know, and I don't need to get into that. The citizens and the civil society, in order to do advocacy by using, say, even budgets as tools and so on, there is a need for this particular thing. Yashoda was mentioned. A whole of academia and the universities are there. I think slowly people have started coming together and doing stuff, which hopefully, now this is a hard thing. Government of Maharashtra has just now set up a committee, as you all know, I'm sure, talking about how to do manual making or to create manuals in order to achieve good governance. Now, manual making is the first step of what you do is mapping the extant processes. Really good governance has to do at looking at the processes and protocols and re-engineering them. And then, of course, have the IT come in to reduce transactions costs. But this recognition is there. As far as the board thing that you mentioned, that we should have a regulatory and for property tax, etc., I would just mention that there's already property tax board that it's dysfunctional, like most things that we have, but it's there. So let it become functional, let it be accountable, and let it be given the empowerment. So these are the non-financial stuffs. In finance, the only thing I would mention is that, as Dr. Kedkar has said and you mentioned, it's very important. I think even 2%, that is, if the state and the center cuts 1% of what they are getting, there would be sufficient for Mumbai and other cities to get, not to completely take care of the losses because of LBT going and all the other revenue handles going because of GST, but I don't think we should completely compensate. I think we should give them enough and let them be aspirational in order to increase revenue resources, because both of you gentlemen and others here in the audience know that once the lot of funds that came from JNNURM, one of the consequences was that the entities, the cities, simply stopped exerting themselves in terms of raising further revenues. Because they had money, they didn't have the capacity to absorb all the resources that they had. So, I don't believe in this kind of compensation completely, but you need to make up so that they feel. And finally, about the planning part of it, and I think planning must be minimalist. And we need to learn from plans that we have made. I'm not getting into the political economy of plans and all those things, maybe at some other session if required. But planners, I found when I was involved in a bit, was that everyone kind of has their own curves and they kind of believe in what they have studied all their lives, which is a good thing. So they are so keen on doing this micro level kind of land use plans at zonal levels and so on. I remember these planning people asking me questions which I couldn't make sense of. I mean, they asked me at the zonal level, is city divided into 1,000 zones, and for a small zone, what is the economy of that? Now, I can't make sense of that. There is, because the whole point of mobility, dynamism and interdependence makes it very difficult to actually attribute, but they need it. And then you will apply these principles rather than thinking of planning to incorporate principles which would deliver outcomes rather than through drawing boards. So, it should be minimalistic, because that's the learning that we should have. Given our capacity lack in terms of implementation, if you find that the earlier development plans you have been able to actualize only 6% to 7% of what you set out to do. Shouldn't we learn something from this? Or should we get back and do the same exact thing and do 6% of what now we say is the plan? And there are difficulties of time horizon, etc. We all know about it. But I think I'll stop here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for putting your views very succinctly and your explanation of governance, understanding governance in these 4 buckets, and in which capacity constraint and building capacity being prime, both for elected representatives and, of course, for the urban bureaucracy. Since we have already overshot by 15 minutes, Dr. Gaikwad had given me 15 minutes, I think still we can spend 2 to 3 minutes for maybe 2 to 3 questions if you have to the panelists. Amita, you can start.
Sir, very interesting presentation. Thanks for that. And the perspective that I'm going to present is slightly different, comes from a more political angle perhaps. But I try to look at a local government, a city government, as basically comprising 4 basic units. One is the citizens, the society in a city. The second is the economy of the city, which is going to power and contribute to services and to an institution. The third is a legal framework that kind of binds all of this. And the fourth is the institution which takes place as a result, which is the municipality in most of these cases. And I think one of the basic challenges that I see in today's municipalities is that the Municipal Act is completely out of sync with reality. If we start looking at it provision by provision, you will see that more than 70% of the city, you cannot apply the act at all. So basically then all our commissioners, assistant commissioners, everyone is basically acting on their own discretionary powers and then being guided by different forces, sometimes their own ethical compasses, sometimes political influences, sometimes other monetary influences, etc., etc. How does one think about municipalization in our context, which is getting citizens into the municipal fold of institutions? Because otherwise everything linked to property tax, we know the percentage of citizens who contribute to property tax. The coverage, including JNM reforms, the coverage of property tax has not improved. Then there are states like Rajasthan which are completely abolishing property tax, right? So how does one think of municipalization from this perspective? I'm not talking of the functional shares and PPP back to municipalization, but some thoughts on transformation from that point of view.
I think you've pointed to the most important fact that prevents municipalization, and that is the statutory framework itself is not conducive to that kind of municipalization. And that is why when we go back to the Act, we certainly find that this is one of the main obstacles, one of the fundamental obstacles in the way of that kind of municipalization. That's why I mentioned that when you have an imperialist kind of act, the chief representative of the state and to do the bidding of the state, as Mr. Chairman mentioned, what kind of municipalization do you expect in that kind of a situation? So unless you change the framework which guides the entire functioning of the city, where citizens also have a role, that is not going to change. The current position is that the citizens are continuously striving to get into the decision-making process, and the municipal corporations are continuously pushing them out, because it's obvious that corporators, councillors, municipal bodies, they do not want citizen participation in the decision-making because it takes away their powers. Now, how do you change this? This can only be changed if the statutory foundations on which we operate, they get changed. I think that's the simple conundrum in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, one short point. Raj sir, my contention is that all this act has not been changed for 70 years. All these issues were there. But this political emasculation of the urban politics in entire political system, somewhere the pathway to the urban future is that first in political discourse, all the politicians and the thought leaders need to decide that what they want to do with that. All this can happen later on because I myself have seen in 40 years, earlier same mayor was there, same act was there, all these issues were there. There was a short-lived renaissance from 1994 when 74 Constitution Amendment Act came up to 2002. Come 2002, first URIF and that kind of city challenge fund, and thereon from onward, government of India and all decision makers, policy makers, understanding, writing on the wall that we need to address urban, and entire political emasculation of the urban political leaders has happened. All decisions are now shifted to the center and state level. I have seen my first 20 years, all the mayors close by. Same bureaucracy was there, same capacity building issues were there, finance issues there. Only in financial, more emasculation has happened because of increasing state funding and the central funding. And as rightly pointed out, Pete sir, and you also rightly pointed out last sentence, that there is an entire reverse gear. But I see reverse gear in political terms. There is no political force from top level and the demand side as you discussed. So how you foresee that? Because all this, whatever you mentioned, your committee 2009, 2002 governance committee, all these are there, we are discussing. But what really missing and going down is a political discourse on how we want to address, which you said policy, particularly urbanization policy. But that basically has to happen at a political level. That is what my contention is. Your reflection on it.
I think we are going into what has happened to urban right from the beginning. And if you look at it politically, for the first several decades, we were laboring under the influence of Mahatma Gandhi as far as cities are concerned. And it was deeply ingrained in the thought process of political parties that cities are not to be taken care of. We have to concentrate on villages because that's where the heart of India lies. And Mahatma was very blunt in stating that cities are the blood on, they thrive on the blood of the villages. And he made this statement that cities can take care of themselves. Nehru was not towing the entire Gandhian line, because he did praise, for instance, Corbusier's Chandigarh, etc. But in his speeches, he repeatedly referred to the fact that villages still are the most important thing that we need to look after. Leave alone the cities, they will take care of themselves. This took quite a while to change, mainly because the kind of urbanization of poverty that happened and rural migration started. So this was a fact which had happened in all the countries, but this was not taken into account that the country is ultimately going to urbanize. Wealth will be created in urban centers, and you need for your economy, you need urbanization. Something which China realized in the 1980s and started tinkering with it, with its haiku system. That seems to be changing, especially in urban areas. But while it was a philosophical concept earlier, now the sudden shift has become on the financial aspects of cities. As finances of the cities, as they become generators of wealth, states are trying to clamp upon cities and take more and more power, because that's where power lies. That's where you can influence big decisions. How do we tackle this? I mean, this can be tackled obviously in a country where the citizen rises, because unless you are going to demand what you want, no one is going to give it to you on a platter. That's the nature of power.
One sentence. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows what, but I did say that this is a terribly important area where There has to be an investment by politicians in this. One thing that comes to my mind, though, is if we were to define urban properly in our country, which would actually then lead to about 60% of India being urban rather than 32 or whatever we have just now. That is one. And then a proper delimitation exercise that would give greater political kind of representation to cities might help them becoming more attractive to the political leaders. But that's just a problem.
Okay, so I think we need to share because a very good thing has to come to an end also. I took borrowed time, but we have overshot that borrowed time also. So essentially, I think we have agreed that we cannot continue with a 19th century act which has gone through 1900 amendments, every time fixing a small problem through some sort of a medication. We need radical changes, and that radical changes would be required going forward to bridge the urban policy and the governance deficit. With that, I think we'll bring the session to a close and move to a tea break.